Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bruce Walker, and it's my great privilege to serve as Dean of the Trulaske College of Business. Thank you for being here today for this Vaughn Executive in Residence lecture. For those of you who are disappointed and thought it was going to be the mathematics lecture, that's in the Bush Auditorium. But you're better off here. Before we begin, my two usual reminders: check your cell phone, make sure it's off, and we hope that you'll stay until conclusion of the question and answer session. We're pleased, in fact we're grateful, to be able to welcome another successful executive to present this lecture as part of our college's speaker series. One of the strategic priorities of our college is collaboration with the business community. And that means we look for win-win situations with the business community. And I know that we benefit from our speaker series in many ways, notably the added knowledge we gain about business practices, controversies, strategies, techniques. And I hope that our guest speakers benefit in various ways as well, notably perhaps some gratification from sharing their knowledge with our students and the rest of us. And I encourage you to ask questions following the lecture, and certainly feel free to come down at the conclusion and have some one-on-one conversation. So now to today's speaker. Steve Furbacher recently retired from his position as President and COO, Chief Operating Officer of Dynegy, after nearly 35 years in the energy industry. Your program has a more complete bio about Mr. Furbacher, so I won't go into details, but I do have to get into kind of a personal connection, which is really important to me, and I hope you'll allow me to do that. Steve Furbacher, in a real sense, is a generational bridge in our college. That's the term I came up with. You see, I met Mr. Furbacher's father, also Steve, in 1990. I mean, just months, if not weeks, after arriving at MU. Steve, the father, graduated from our college in the 1940s. And during his very successful business career, he held significant managerial positions with a wide variety of industrial firms, manufacturing firms, other firms in the industrial sector, and he eventually retired as Executive Vice President of Wheeler Brader Fry. The short version of the story is that Steve wanted to donate his fractional interest in 2 geothermal energy limited partnerships to the university for the benefit of our college. I said that would be great, and the university said no way. They thought that particular financial instrument sounded at best quite exotic and perhaps risky. Eventually they relented, and the good news is that the partnerships generated hundreds of thousands of dollars for both faculty support in our college and for our new building. In fact, Dan Turbin holds the Steve Furbacher Distinguished Professorship in Organizational Change at this time. And I told Steve the son that I know that my friend Steve the father would be very pleased, Dan, that you're in that position. So you uphold his high standards. If you take a look at the oil portraits above the second floor walkway, second portrait from the left, you'll see Steve's smiling face. So I look at it a lot because my wife Pam and I really became great friends with Steve the father. So it's special today to have Steve the son here, and really even before that I got to know the grandson, Chris, who's here today because he's a student in our college. So that's the generational bridge. For me at least, it's the first time that I can think of where we've had the involvement of 3 generations with our college, and I think that's pretty special. So for today's talk, as you know, the energy industry is tremendously complex, in a lot of ways volatile, under an awful lot of public scrutiny. Well, our speaker, Steve Furbacher, comes from Dynegy, which has its headquarters in Houston, operates 31 power generation facilities in 15 states. I believe that includes about 10 in the state of Illinois. So like many other enterprises, energy companies are accountable to multiple groups, including customers, shareholders, and various government entities. I would hypothesize that as a result of the collapse of Enron in late 2001, energy companies face added challenges above and beyond other firms. Both before and surely after Enron's implosion, besides being involved with many aspects of Dynegy's operations, Mr. Furbacher dealt with many regulatory issues both at the federal and the state levels. Therefore, he's certainly well qualified to discuss with us today the issue of whether the combination of regulation and legislation represents a path to added accountability and more responsible business behavior, or perhaps a path to restraints, unnecessary restraints on business practices and unfunded mandates that hurt a corporation's bottom line. I'm really confident that Mr. Furbacher's experience and his talk today will have excellent educational value for all of our students, especially those in finance and accounting, but I think it goes way beyond that. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome, Mizzou welcome, to Steve Furbacher.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Okay, now we're going to do a little housekeeping here. If you have a seat open next to you, will you raise your hand so the folks who are relegated to the stairs have a place to sit? If you have a spot next to you, go ahead and find a spot. Because there's some spots, if you don't like the front row, there's some spots up here. Okay. You can hear me fine in the back? If I talk about it like this, and if at some point in the process my voice lowers because it sometimes does that, just raise your hand and I'll respond to you and speak up. So good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I have spent a great couple sessions already today, and I hope this one goes as well. Today's a favorite day of mine. As a kid growing up, there was a tradition in the Midwest where I went to school where on May Day you brought flowers to somebody that was important to you. And I continued that for a number of years with Ellen, but as I got to be old and crotchety, I sort of quit doing that. So I needed something I need to start again. But so May Day is special to me. And as Bruce said today, this place is special to me because my dad had a big impact on today's talk. Because he taught me some things as I was growing up that I want to share with you today. As he mentioned, I had a front row seat to the energy sector meltdown, and as such, I have some things to share and some observations, and I will give you the disclaimer now. They are just observations and thoughts that belong to me, and because I'm sure that there are people involved who will take umbrage with my assessment as my observations about their behavior, because I'm going to talk some about that today. My message today is pretty simple, and I'll get to it as we get through the presentation. And I'm going to dispense with this issue fairly quickly in the presentation. And the message is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I think central to why I agreed to come here today. And that is simply do the right thing with the expectation that the right thing will happen. It's a simple statement. Sometimes people say it's kind of trite, but I think it's universally accepted. Everybody in here probably says, yeah, okay, I want to do the right thing. But it's also universally hard to do on a sustained basis over the course of a career because of some things I'm going to talk about. And so I'm going to use the Dynegy story to kind of walk through that, because it was not just Enron that imploded, so did Dynegy, so did a bunch of other companies, and we'll talk some about that. So if you look at this slide, I can rest assured that if the people that are listed on this slide, and lots more that I could put dozens of slides up here like this, most of them probably said that they wanted to do the right thing, and most of them, I would suspect today, based on my experience, still believe that they did the right thing. And we're going to talk some about why that happens. Michael Milliken was the Wall Street icon until the junk bond stand. He spent some time in prison. Bernard Ebers was a former coach of youth sports, taught in his Sunday school, likable guy, large donor, entrepreneur. He lost sight of doing the right thing. Dennis Kozlowski thought Tyco, couldn't figure out whether Tyco belonged to the shareholders or himself. But he at one point was a Wall Street favorite and got reinforced for that. Samuel Israel, a hedge fund, he took some $400 million from his investors and spent 20 years in prison. Closer to home to us, the Enron story, Ken Lay, Jeff Skilling, Andy Fastow. Today, they were pillars in the community. They're active in their church. And they were Wall Street heroes. They could do no wrong at one point in time in the eyes of Wall Street. And you know the story. And they each profess today that they still did the right thing. They didn't do anything wrong. And I believe that they believe that. Okay? And I'm going to talk some about that. Okay. So, equally troubling to me is the fact that of the typical regulatory and political response we get when we have a problem like this. How many of you are following the presidential campaign? Everybody's following the presidential campaign. So and we're getting the usual expected responses. It's a holier-than-thou indignation that how did this happen and why did these people do things? And they beat the drums, point the fingers, and we're going to fix this thing forever. And every time that happens, and every time we as industry do something wrong, we get lots of help. The process industry got it after Union Carbide and Bhopal became the poster child of how lax industry practices. We brought it on ourselves by our own behaviors. So we got process safety management, an extensive series of regulations and controls, lots of enforcement. So explain to me why between 1995 and 2005 there were 22 fatalities at the BP refinery in Texas. You got Sarbanes-Oxley. You probably heard enough about that, so we all kind of... But why are we saying let's relax it? It's because it's not letting us do some of the things we want to do, right? So is that the right answer? FASB standards. How many of you are in accounting? This one really blows me. I went to the website because I'm not an accountant, so I had to do some homework on this one. Statements of financial accounting standards, statements of financial concepts, accounting concepts, FASB interpretations, FASB technical bulletins, EITF abstracts, 1988, 101 FASB standards, 1998, 134, in 2008, 161. Explain to me what we didn't know about accounting in 1989. And why we had to have all that extra stuff. And how many of you are for a flat tax and get rid of the complex flat tax code? Because every time somebody finds a loophole, what happens? We get more regulation, and then we go look for more loopholes. So the results are some things in common. They're all complex attempts to regulate behavior and to find the right way to do things. And what we get out of that, typically, is it creates lots of jobs because we need people now to go enforce and people with expertise to interpret and apply in companies, and so it creates lots of jobs. It raises salaries for those folks, which is a wonderful thing because there are too few of them, so we all compete for scarce resources and salaries go up. It creates cottage industries where we have people that would develop expertise to search for loopholes and ways through and pass through the regulation so we can find ways to do the things we want to do and not have to deal with the constraints. And all the while, people lose sight of the original intent of the regulation, and that is to get people to do the right thing. So, and I'm not the only one that talks about this. George Magnus, who's the senior economic advisor for UBS, he says that it's inevitable because we're human. And he goes on to say in a recent article, no amount of regulation or legislation will make a difference. And I agree with him. So right about here, I'm suspensing with that question. The answer is, it's not appropriate when it comes to regulating, to trying to influence behavior, because behavior is a personal choice. And I don't think you can regulate personal choice. So let's go to the Dynegy story. The Dynegy story is a classic. It's the stuff case studies are made out of. So if you have somebody in here who's interested in making a case study, I got some fodder here. In all kinds of ways. You could probably make a dozen of them. And I even thought about maybe reality TV. Okay, let's talk about Dynegy. Started from a humble beginning. 1984, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, issued FERC Order 436, which opened access to interstate natural gas pipelines to producers and to others. Okay? And what that did is it created another cottage industry. And that's natural gas marketing. Hundreds of them, literally hundreds of people got in the business. Integrated oils. And one of those was a company called Natural Gas Clearinghouse, an audacious name for a little startup company. Renamed later Dynegy. And I like to kiddingly, when in the days before the collapse, I used to kid our founder that it was started up with a handful of people, a phone book, a roll of quarters, in the back of a Chevrolet, because that's about all they had. I couldn't find a free photo on the internet of a Chevrolet. But that's kind of where we started. So, in the next 5 years, NGC emerged from the pack as a winner, one of about a dozen. Fundamentally focused, and the reason was they were fundamentally focused on a physical movement of gas and the marketing of physical gas. Developed huge expertise in logistics. They could get gas from anywhere and put it to anywhere. But sort of by the early 90s, 92, 93, they ended up with a problem. Customers started saying, "Where's your gas supply?" Because they just bought gas and sold gas. So they went out, they solved that problem. They went out and bought some gas processing plants. They're plants that take gas that comes out of the wellhead, process it, and make it marketable. And they pointed to that gas dozens of times, the same gas, so that people are now comfortable they had supply. Now, their supply may come from Louisiana, not Oklahoma where the plants were. Never mind, they could point to supply. They didn't buy those assets because they made strategic sense or they wanted to get into the asset business because they thought they would be asset light. So then by the early 90s then, FERC issued an order deregulating the transmission and access to transmission for electricity. Created the same opportunity, and it worked again. Followed the same model, asset light, no assets, logistics, commercial trading. Delivered when they said they would deliver it, and they were very good at it. So the model held because pipes and wires have physical constraints as to how much volume you can push through them. And remember that because I'm going to come back to that here in another example. Then we went on an acquisition binge because the Dynegy figured out by the mid-90s that they kind of liked the asset business and they can make a lot of cash doing it. It was a good business to be in. So they bought Trident in 1995. They bought a company called Trident, which was the former Occidental Petroleum City Service gas midstream business. That's gas processing, and then natural gas liquids, ethane, propane, butane, natural gasoline. Then a year later, they came to Tulsa and visited me as president of Warren and asked Warren Petroleum, which was Chevron's business, and said, we'd like to buy your business. And it made a lot of sense to me, so we did that. They acquired that in 1996, along with Chevron's natural gas business unit, their gas marketing business. 1997, acquired Destech, a Dow Chemical cogen business. So they're following the same path in the asset business. 98, changed the name to Dynegy. I joined in 96 with the Chevron transaction. In 1999, bought a company called Illinova that had unregulated generation, about 6,000 megawatts of generation in Illinois, and a pipes and wires utility. In other words, gas and electricity distribution utility in Illinois. So now Dynegy was in the utility business. But the important thing is that all this time they stayed focused on the fundamentals, the physical business. It was a cash business. And then we got too good for our own good because we couldn't do anything wrong. We were growing at almost 20% a year. CEO became a Wall Street favorite. Stock price, which had hovered in, kind of was languishing in, kind of settling in the mid-teens. We grew the midstream business into a pretty efficient business, and then had big plans to expand the Destech platform because we made two assumptions. Both turned out wrong. First assumption was that there was a scarcity of manufacturing capacity in the world for turbine generator sets necessary to make electricity out of gas. And in fact, at the time, there was. The assumption was that you could corner the market on all this and get in the order blank and buy all those, and then nobody else could do it, right? Last time I checked, free markets work very efficiently. And in a few years, lots of turbines were coming out at the end of the manufacturing line. Second mistake we made was that the gas price, long-term gas price, on which these projects were justified, was going to be a hockey stick. How many case studies have you looked at and read and analyzed that was the assumption and it doesn't materialize because markets work efficiently? Never mind that those were only 8 to 9% return projects on high-risk projects. The CEO didn't have any trouble. He just bullied the board. There was a debate at the time we started building these plants. There was a big debate in the company. Do we sell some of that capacity, lock in some of the return, and then leave the other open to market, but at least lock in some of the return and ensure some cash stream? Versus those who said, no, hockey stick price, it's going there forever, and we need to go 100% naked that length in the market. The latter won out. Probably one of the best managers we have left the company as a result, because he was convinced it was wrong. And they not only did they make that decision on the assets we were building, that wasn't enough. Then we went out and acquired capacity, the rights to capacity, in plants that other people were building. And committed to very long-term revenue streams for the right to that capacity in big numbers. So then what we did is Enron was the darling. Enron was in water. Enron got into broadband. So we had to get into broadband. The CEO pushed us into broadband. And the vision was a worldwide fiber optic network. We were going to get into the transportation business. Same model as gas and power, right? So we did. Acquisition, joint ventures, about $1.8 billion in capital investment, G&A, and operating expense without a $1 return. Sold the business for $10 million later, by the way, because we made a very important assumption that was wrong. The assumption was that capacity was constrained and we could control capacity. The answer is technology changed about every 3 to 6 months. And all the technology change was a new box on the front end and a new box on the back end. And capacity went from, by example, these aren't the right units, 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 in the same wire, same fiber optic cable. Okay? Markets work, and you have to make right assumptions. Wall Street was certainly happy. Our stock tickled $60. So when Enron started to fail in the fall of 2001 and all the sort of rumblings in the marketplace, our CEO decided that we were going to acquire Enron. And with a little over 7 days of due diligence on a company of that size, we made a deal to acquire Enron. 6 weeks later, fortunately we left ourselves an out. We gave them $1.5 billion, by the way, to help float the company. And then borrowed that from Chevron, our major shareholder, one of our major shareholders. And then we, 6 weeks later, backed away and Enron went into bankruptcy because we found the problems that we should have found in due diligence. I was kind here with the title. 2002 was a ride that I don't wish on any of you. We couldn't shake off Enron. It was kind of like it just couldn't get rid of it. Then in the first quarter of 2002, a whistleblower former Dynegy employee, went to the Wall Street Journal and talked about something called Project Alpha. Project Alpha was a BCF a day. That's 1 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas physical deal. We were going to sell to a customer 1 billion cubic feet a day of gas. And that's, to just give you an example, today's average capacity over the course of a year, annual consumption of natural gas is in the 60, 70 BCF a day. So that's a big volume of gas. And only this was a kind of a unique deal that the bankers and Arthur Andersen brought to us. They were our accountants. In exchange, the deal was we would get $300 million in cash up front, and then over the course of the lifetime of the deal, we would sell them gas under market. And then we hid the fact, we accounted for it as operating cash instead of financing. Okay? And that was the issue around which the storm brew. So Enron didn't cause Dynegy's problem. Dynegy did. So the power price curve collapsed. We had a disabled broadband business. The news and the lawsuits and all the investigations around the winter of 2000 about the gas price in California, all the conversations some of you may have seen. We were a minor player in that. Enron was sort of the star culprit in that one. By May of 2002, our CEO was asked, what did that slide say? He resigned? Released. He was, he was let go. Creditors were pounding us. The rating agencies reduced us to junk, our rating to junk status, and kind of deep in the junk status. Collateral calls from everywhere, so our liquidity was a huge problem. And in August of 2002, we came within 36 hours of having to file bankruptcy. Stock price hit 58 cents. 6 months. Okay, the story has a little brighter ending, but the situation was grim. Lawsuits and investigations, and we were talking to the Securities Exchange Commission, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the Department of Justice, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, about every state's attorney general. We had and all of our shareholders, as you might imagine. We had debt of $9 billion. We had debt-like instruments, those tolling agreements, that capacity we bought on those plants that now weren't running because the power price collapsed. None of our plants were running either, by the way. The turbine generators we committed to buy that we still hadn't received and are still in the pipeline to come for years. $1.5 billion we owed Chevron because Enron got it. We couldn't get it back because they filed Chapter 11. Good people bailing out, as you might guess. We had rats jump the ship too. Disabled broadband, utility business that we had, and we're not good at running utility businesses. We're better at running for-profit businesses. I have a view on that, as you might guess. The generation and midstream business were totally different businesses and business models. We had a horrible morale, as you might guess, when people's 401ks went to zero. And the stock price went to, for options and others, went to 58 cents. Horrible relationship with rating agencies, bankers, shareholders, bondholders, employees. And there isn't any, tell me what we could have done to regulate or legislate that not having happened. Not a thing. It's all about human behavior. Bruce Williamson came in October 2002 with his to-do list. We didn't have a strategy. We had a to-do list. All that stuff that I talked about. We had 200 people focused on the to-do list and the senior management team. And we had a couple of us on the senior management team and the rest of the employees focused on running the business and trying to maximize cash inflow to the company and running the business well. So we segregated those two things. So if you ever get in a situation like that, think about that as an important, because it works well. We focused on cash and liquidity. Net income didn't make a difference. And kept what rumbled through the balance sheet. We had to survive. Transparency, he brought transparency with every agency, because I'm going to get back to that later. And we just opened the books to the investigators. We opened the books to the rating agencies. And in Q&A, if you ask me a question about how the deal with the rating agencies, I'll tell you a funny story. We had new guiding principles with the cornerstone, do the right thing, with the expectation right things will follow. We got the wrong people off the bus. We didn't have to read Jim Collins to do that. We just got rid of them. Went back to a fundamental physical business. All the financial futures trading, all the other stuff went away. We sold businesses and assets to raise cash and to get more focused as a company. Sold the broadband business for $10 million in 2003, sold Illinois Power in 2004, and sold the midstream company in 2005. And we stayed in the generation business simply because it was the one that had the least value in the market. We could get the most cash for the midstream business. Had it been the other way around, I'd be up here talking to you about being president, COO of the midstream business. Okay? It was that dispassionate a decision which gave us the most leverage to fix the company. It was good news to me because we had done that the company that I was running was the most value. So it was nice to see, but it was a very simple. And now what we have is we have strong controls. We have great people. We have people now finally asking to come back. We have people that left that are coming back now. We're choosing which ones we want back. We got about $5.5 billion in debt, all in debt and non-debt debt. And that's after acquiring 70% more generation capacity in April a year ago now from LS Power. We're now about 20,000 megawatts. Pretty good sized generating company. Single line of business, single focus. Okay, with that background, let's talk about some things. What happened in the company during all this time. We were organized in functional silos. They didn't talk to each other. They weren't encouraged to. Businesses were kept separate. In fact, in 1996, when we put the midstream businesses together, they represented about 70% of the net income. By this time, they represented less than 10 because the company had grown. So midstream was kind of shuffled off in the corner while we did all the sexy stuff. I have no emotion about that. And later we brought in broadband, and everything was separate. We didn't even integrate Illinois' accounting into our own accounting system. Let them run on their own. Commercial was top dog. Everybody wanted to be in the commercial business because they got all the bonuses, they got all the accolades. Everyone else in the company was second class. That's just not an opinion, that's a fact. Ops was pretty good shape because we were second. You wouldn't want to be in finance or accounting or any of the other staff functions. The founders were entrepreneurial deal makers, little time for process and controls, great deal makers, and never were able to make the transition from knowing all the details and being able to have their hands around it to running a big company, with a complex company. They were good people, all of them. Active in church, they're active in the community, they're just good, solid people. They're just wired differently than is required to run a big company, and they never made the transition. There are 4 critical transition points in this whole saga. There was a complexity shift that occurred in the kind of the mid-90s when we started acquiring all those businesses. There was a physical to financial shift that occurred in 98, 99 kind of time frame. And that's when we made the decision to go have all that open length of generating capacity and to go buy more. And when you go buy more, you impute some value of that back, mark-to-market accounting, so it creates earnings today. So it helped with earnings growth. So we had all this financial trading to help us with earnings. What we lost sight of is that a low-level investment-grade company doesn't have the balance sheet to handle the potential collateral calls and the margin calls that go along with having those kinds of positions. And that's what killed us. And then we had a private to public shift. So we went from, that was 1995 with the Trident acquisition. It was a reverse merger, became a public company, and we went from having a very strong cash focus to having a net income focus. Cash be darned. The midstream business can provide the cash, and then later generation can provide the cash. They used to, in those days prior to this some of these transitions, because they all occurred near the same time, you could keep track of the business on a big chief tablet. Get more complex, you need systems, controls, processes, and without the push to do that, it took people in the organization in a position to make that shift. So we focused on that, and the greatest thing that ever happened was they said, we don't like the mundane gas midstream business, so you just go off and run that. I said, fine. So we had controls and processes, and that's why it was worth what it was when we sold it. We were the kings of spin. We could spin any story. The IR folks would get together with the founder and a few of the key senior managers and senior executives, and they would say, okay, what's our story going to be this year? Every year when we start to go on the road. CEO disdained the board. They were in the way. The CFO had no time for rating agencies and bankers. And IR made pretty slides. We were a second-tier company, like that ad. We were trying harder to be like Enron. Employee population was young at senior positions. We didn't have any gray hair in some of those positions. We thought prices were only going up because they had never experienced a downturn. So that wasn't even in their reality. It was all about what I call WIFM. W-I-I-F-M. What's in it for me? At the root of the problems was leadership behavior. Our entrepreneurial CEO. Brilliant, creative, successful. He was a Pied Piper. He got people to kind of come along. And he was so great, as terrific as he was in the early years, is the opposite in the later years. He lost interest in the business, got distracted by other things. His ego got in the way. His quest for status and recognition got in the way. Naysayers became simply people who didn't understand. Let me give you some examples. In 1997, we moved downtown from the original offices. We were getting too big in the new quarters, so we had to move downtown Houston into the second tallest building in Houston, and we had to have the top floors. And the CEO's office has to overlook the Enron building because it was lower than ours. When the new football stadium was being built to house the Texans, the new Texans franchise, they were looking for a stadium sponsor. Fortunately, Reliant bid $10 million a year for 30 years. So our $7 million a year bid didn't win. We sponsored the PGA Tour Championship. Now, what does Dynegy have to do anything with the PGA Tour's Championship? Our CEO was a golfer. Stock purchase loans. He offered loans as the stock price is coming down. Well, we can buy. It's a great buying opportunity. Bruce Williamson, our new CEO, when he came in, when he figured out about all these stock purchase loans that were around, he called me in one day and he said, "I need to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." And these were in the days when Bruce and I were trying to figure each other out. He didn't trust me and I didn't trust him, and so we were kind of doing a bunch of this. And he said, "Tell me why you don't have a stock purchase loan and why you're the only one that doesn't have one." I said, "Because I said no." And he said, "Well, all these other people said that Chuck pressured him. Did Chuck pressure you?" "No." I said, "In fact, in the days after those loans were available, you were able to buy stock at 5 cents on the dollar, and the company would loan you the rest of the money. Can you regulate around that? I don't think so." And all those people were crying now because they got pressured into it by Chuck, and they should be relieved of the debt. And I said, I just looked at Bruce and I said, "Bruce, all I recall was people high-fiving the hallways about what a great deal they had just made." That's enough of that. Okay. With that background, let's go back to the question. I'll say one more time, you can't legislate or regulate behavior. It's a personal choice someone has to make. So, how do you deal with it? There's a place for, I'm not saying there's not a place for regulation and legislation. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, but this particular problem you can't solve that way. People simply find ways through it. So I like to keep it simple, and I boil it down to sort of the 3 management leadership conditions that you run into that I want to share with you and talk about. These are my things and my observations, and you can either accept them or not. Okay, so I'm offering them out there for. Let's go to condition number 1. I want to be like Mike. How many remember the commercial? Are you all guys old enough to remember the I want to be like the Nike commercial? Okay. All right. How many of you, when you grew up, now I'm going to show of hands, had the dream, and you practiced in the driveway making the last shot to win the NBA championship? You were Michael Jordan. Or how many of you would practice the last field goal? or did something else, imagining that you were in that position. I bet I see without smiles, I'm assuming a bunch of you. So we all do it. We all want to be somebody. So that's condition number one. Bill George, he's a Harvard Business School professor. You know him? He has an interview with a Wendy Kopp, president of Teach for America. And I'm just going to read what he says. In my studies of leaders who have failed, these leaders fell prey to the pressures and seductions they faced. It wasn't that they lacked leadership skills, style, or power, but that the intrinsic rewards of leadership, money, fame, glory, and power, went to their heads. Their egos, their greed, their craving for public adulation, and their fear of loss of power overwhelmed their responsibility to build their institutions. I can't say any better than that. I've seen many leaders who started out, and this is the most important thing for you, and I'd like you to think about this and go look in the mirror and promise me you'll keep this in mind in front of you the rest of your career. I've seen many leaders who started out in humble circumstances and were very modest about their accomplishments. But as they achieved success, got more and more awards and kudos and media attention, and eventually went to their heads, although they would not admit it, many of them started thinking, I am the company. So it comes down to this. What's important? Keep in mind what's important. How do we define success? And what rewards and incentives do we have in place to drive that success? Do they get to that end, or do they drive some funky behavior? And I would suggest to you that we are each one of us in here and in corporate America are personally and individually responsible. Personally and individually and collectively responsible for managing this condition and make sure it doesn't happen. Because it's a matter of personal choice. Either choose to succumb or you resist. Condition number 2, the emperor's new clothes. How many know the kid's story about the emperor's new clothes? Okay. For those who don't know it, it's pretty simple. Emperor likes clothes. A couple of swindlers come into town and convince him that they can weave a suit for him that will allow him, he'll wear it, and people who aren't worthy of wearing it will think he's not wearing anything. So he'll be able to tell those who aren't competent in their jobs. He then goes on, so that he gives a bunch of money and some silk and gold and things to weave this stuff. That's what they asked for. They put that in their knapsacks, and they started faking weaving the cloth. So he sent one of his trusted folks down to look at this, and the trusted folks, and they said, "Isn't this the wonderful things we're weaving?" And the trusted person thought to himself, "I don't see anything." But he went back and told the emperor, because he didn't want to be considered unworthy, that they were coming along fine. Happened again. The emperor went down and looked at him, thought the same thing. I don't want anybody to let anybody know that. So he went back and said, "Aren't they coming fine?" The whole town celebrated. And he came out, and everybody was cheering and how wonderful the new clothes were, but he wasn't wearing anything. And some little kid in the audience said, "But he doesn't have any clothes on." And then everybody started finally talking. It took a little innocent. So if you think about this and you take this back into the business world in the context in which I'm talking, I think all of us have worked around emperors. I certainly have. And Dynegy had one. I'd suggest most of the other companies had at least one or two. He wanted a broadband business. He listened to, and so the list goes on, and I've already talked about all that. So once again, this is a personal choice. We are individually and collectively responsible for, call it like it is, And if you know it and don't say it, you are equally culpable. The third condition, if it's not black, it must be white. I found a wonderful, it's wonderful. I found a wonderful new website, Wikipedia. Love it. It's wonderful. Because it's just, you can go in and I'm not saying everything there is right, but it's kind of fun. So I went in and I Googled black and white. Up came Wikipedia and it came website, right? That's where I discovered Wikipedia. So I read past tuxes and gowns and galas. Okay? And it got down to the informal fallacy of false dilemma. And I said, wow, I got to think about that. What does that mean? Okay, and it goes on to say it's a situation in which only two alternatives are considered as options. Okay? Problem I'm going to tell you here that managers and we all want to look for the right answer. We want it to be simple. We want it to be black or white. We want it to be get on to the next thing. And it's especially prevalent in today's world where we're used to getting everything right now. Fact is, it's not cut and dry. There is no black or white. It's all gray. It's all shades of right, shades of wrong. Okay? Remember I said I didn't think that I believed Jeff Skilling and Ken Lay and Andy Fastow when they protested that they didn't do anything wrong? I believe they believe that. Let me suggest to you how they got there. Take a sphere. Okay? Round object. Let's assume that the backside for me is wrong or black. The front side is right or white. Okay? What happens is that there are shades of gray off that center, that right point. Because nothing ever fits right there. So what we do is we go in and we kind of see something that's off here about 3-4 degrees. And we go into the regulations and legislation. And we say, and we do some economic analysis, and we do things, and we say, yeah, that'll work. It's legal. Whoop. We've defined right again. Remember, right now is over here. But for us, right's here. And we do that over and over and over and over and over again. And pretty soon we're looking at the other side of the sphere. And that's what happens with people and leaders and managers in the decision process. It's an insidious, subtle thing that happens. Happens over time. And before you know it, you don't even know what happened. And you're Jeff Skilling saying, I didn't do anything wrong. And believe in it, because you have convinced yourself over time that you're doing it all in the right answer, for the right reasons. So again, this condition is about personal choice. Individual responsibility, collective responsibility to make sure that you do the right thing. And it's testing. Okay, yeah, that's okay, but does it feel right? Does it look right? What do you think? Winning for the sake of winning is a slippery slope. If you're not sure about that, let's go back to this first slide. There are a bunch of folks that are now pretty sure of that after having spent some time in prison. It applies to Dynegy, this condition, before the fall, because we didn't do it right. It applies to Dynegy after the fall and the restructuring, because we finally got it right. Because one of the things that I feel best about for having stayed through the process and not abandoned ship like everybody, a whole lot of other folks did when times were grim, is the fact that we made do the right thing with our expectation right things will follow. Not only the lead guiding principle, but we lived it. I can't recall a management executive staff meeting with Bruce where at least once sometime during the meetings, because his meetings were long, he's a 4-hour guy. Drove me crazy. That we at some point in time somebody would say, well, what do our guiding principles say? When we were talking about a principle or something we wanted to do, a decision. Always tested it. And we made that part of the company. And interestingly enough, we've done some employee survey stuff. Guess what pops out as the most important reason people stay at Dynegy? Because we'll do the right thing with the expectation right things happen. And in our case, doing the right thing meant our debtors our bondholders got 100 cents on the dollar, when at one point they were down around 18 cents. Our equity holders have had value restored, not $60, but they've had value restored and created. The employees have 401ks that are now healthy again, and a whole lot of other things have happened. That one simple principle. That's not a regulation. It's not a it's not a law. It's simply a way to regulate. You regulate behavior by setting expectations and values and adhering to it, no matter what. Winning for winning, for the sake of winning, is bankrupt. Now, these three conditions don't exist alone, separately. So don't even try to debate me on that. I acknowledge that. They don't exist separately. But it helps, in my opinion, having been through all this, to separate them. Because it forces you to think about each one. Am I falling into one of these traps? Because you fall in one, you're going to automatically dump into another one, likely. And then pretty soon you got the sphere looking at the backside of the sphere. So to wrap this up, I'm just going to read the paragraph up here. If Magnus that's George Magnus, the chief economist of UBS, is right about these disruptions being inevitable because they're part of the human condition, then the solution must lie in the choices each one of us makes as we proceed through our careers. Those are my words. Okay? And if you all walk out of here, if one of you walks out of here and lives by this the rest of your life, why, this has been well worth the time. My hope is that you all do. So here's the answer and my challenge to you. Not just at work, but at home, in the community activities, youth sports. How many people seen people have these kind of conditions, those three conditions, in youth sports? Wow. Whatever it is, do the right thing with the expectation that the right thing is going to happen. And I'm going to give you a couple questions that you keep in front of yourselves and ask all the time, whenever you're making decisions. At lunch today, and then again, I repeated again at the 2 o'clock session. It's my mirror test. When you're about to make a decision, and it feels you kind of had to wrestle with it, go look in the mirror. Look right in your eyes. And ask yourself, and tell yourself, this is what I want to do. Does it feel right? Does it look right? Is it the right thing to do? And then ask yourself a second question. Looking in that, if I was in somebody else's shoes, looking at this today, tomorrow, or 5 years from now, would I still say it's the right thing? Because if the decision doesn't have some durability, sustainability, then it's probably ought not do it. Might you pass up some bucks? Yep. I assure you it will pay you many times over because you've done the right thing and you'll get it somewhere else. That's been my experience. The heroes in this story, and all these stories we referenced in ours, is a whistleblower at Dynegy. It's Cynthia Cooper at WorldCom, the internal auditor who smelled a rotten fish and when badgered into stopping her search, continued to do it at home at night. And it's the financial analyst she found who got fired because he said no when asked to do something wrong. Those are the heroes in this story. Because they can hold their head up and say they did the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Furbacher. Wow. You got a 3-credit course there, huh? I'm not sure whether it was an ethics course or a finance course or an accounting course or
They're all the same. It's all the same.
Together. So, boy, we're going to have to order dinner in because I got a lot of questions. So I know a lot of you have other commitments, but we do have time for a few questions. Let me use my prerogative, and based on my naivety, I was struck by the fact that you said that one of the behaviors that drove the collapse was that Dynegy became focused on net income, not cash. That, to me, remember I'm a marketing guy, that runs counter to the importance of net income.
If you're in a physical commodity business, doing a physical business, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
When you introduce the long-dated commercial deals that have to be marked to market and brought back to current income, now you got a whole different game. You want to create income? Go do a lousy deal, put a curve on it, and mark it back to income. We did that. Enron did it. El Paso did it. Reliant, I'll stop. Sorry.
Okay, good. All right. Other questions?
But that, Bruce, let me build on that.
Yeah.
That's one of the issues I have with the FASB standards today, because they're trying to deal with all these things and be so prescriptive. They have made it so that we have our finance and accounting group, our accounting groups are focused on making sure they get it right, rather than what's the right answer. And can you tell me that we have clearer income statements today than we had 10 years ago? I don't buy it. Our income statements are too complex. They have too many things rumbling through balance sheets that are non-cash on businesses that are in certain kinds of businesses. So that's...
Okay. Questions?
Yes?
I guess my question is, with that premise that you took from Magnus that it's inevitable that people are going to cause disruptions, and I guess how would you hold them accountable without these regulations? Because I guess all they can do at this point is, well, this person found this loophole, so we got to stop that loophole, and somebody else is going to look for something else. But if we just leave free rein, how do you hold people accountable for when they look in the mirror, and inevitably some people will look in the mirror and say, I'm going to do something shady instead of, or how do you hold the people accountable that do that without some regulation?
Yeah, the question for those in the back is, how do you hold people accountable without regulation for bad behavior, or for their behavior, good or bad, right? And the way I look at that is, I'm not saying regulation's bad, but I think that broader, more simple regulation that speaks to sort of generally the right thing to do puts a bigger net. Now, does it create a more difficult time for a prosecutor to come in? And yes, it does. But it's harder to do the wrong thing when you got a big old net in front of you. And my point is that we're going to still have all the regulations. I can't do anything about that. So I'm not even going to argue that. You know, we can debate this one for a long time. But what I will tell you is that what I think the way we need to attack it is the way I'm trying to attack it. Get people to educate people. Get people to start thinking about it the right way. So does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely. Do you think there's some way that you can set up some sort of incentive system that would kind of cause incentive for business to maybe keep higher standards of accounting rather than spending all this money on policing things? I guess I don't know. I don't know enough about accounting standards to propose anything. But do you think it's something with incentive systems that the business world can take care of it more than maybe regulating agencies can take care of it?
I think it's a behavior issue, and you got human. I agree with George. It's sort of a human condition.
But you try to build the values. I mean, I think that's
And the
what
key
a
is
talk
build-
like
kill.
this does. You know, get you think about what's the right thing, what's the wrong thing, where's the gray, how do you deal with it?
And I'm trying to get to you. That's my one of the reasons I wanted to retire is I wanted the opportunity to do stuff like this. Okay, I've done this at university. I do this at University of Houston. I'm doing it here. I'd readily accept it, and I've got a couple other that I'm talking to. And the point I want to make to people is get to people that are your age, and maybe get there early. Because if we can get some leverage, because at the end of the day, it's all about people just behaving right. And you can't, people are still going to have, we're going to still have murders, but so they have some laws and punishment to deal with that. You're going to still have people steal money. But you got to set up value systems and push corporations to have, to start to focus on that in a different way.
Got a question up?
Yeah, I guess, you never know who you can run into here. I'm a refugee from Villanova. One of the companies that Dynegy acquired. And I'm here because of that. So I got severed from my company job, my 30-year company job. I'm a Mizzou engineer. And so I got my business here in town now. But I guess I would say thank you for being so candid about the whole process there, not spinning it and all that. One of the things that happens, of course, is like, okay, I had my 30 years, I had my 401k, I had my stock in there, and you know what? When you guys were buying us, and your leadership, some of your leadership came to Illinois, and they're in the room, they're talking to us, and you know what? Your little radar goes up. And I would say to you, trust your instincts on these. You can sense these things. I did not trust this group, so I think, okay, within about 2 weeks after the merger was completed, the acquisition really, I sold most of my stock. My 401k turned into other things. So I was kicking myself later then, because that was in the $20 to $25 range, and then it got to $60. And I thought, boy, that was the dumbest move I ever made. So I'd say trust your instincts. You can sense this when leadership has gone foul. I think the thing in terms of legislation and regulation, one thing to try to do is make sure that there's some consequences for when we get misbehaving management. However, I would say the marketplace is probably the biggest, the equalizer for the consequences. Unfortunately, it does cast a wide net, and there's a lot of innocent bystanders. So I think you're very candid. Thank you for a really candid story.
Good.
Hey, I'm not going to repeat the question, which she asked me to do for the mic. Okay. Now, but I want to make a comment on that. And we talked about it at lunch, and so I'm going to just talk about it to the whole group. When you're looking for a place to work, I have 2 pieces of advice for you. First, find a business whose product you have an affinity for. I worked in Chevron Chemicals fertilizer business, and the people said I did a great job for a few years, and then the people said I did a great job, but I didn't enjoy it. I didn't have fun. There wasn't any joy in it. Not that anything wrong with farming or fertilizer. I need food to eat too. But it wasn't my passion. Other businesses I had low. So find something you enjoy. Second thing is take a hard look at the company's value systems and make sure that's the place you want to work. And you may not get it right, but if you get in there and find it's not, find someplace else to work.
We have a question here?
Scott, you mentioned something about a story about the rating agencies.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, rating agency story. We went, I mentioned how bad everything was, and they were actually really angry with us. So Bruce came, and he came mid-October 2002, or 2001, and, 2002, and we went to the rating agencies with our business plan. We were in the process of just finishing up the business plan. He tweaked it some, and then we went on. And so we went to the rating agencies on December the 4th or 5th of 2002, not 6 weeks after he got there. And we went there with a promise, a to-do list. We didn't have any credibility. So we arrived at Moody's. We didn't have breakfast because with Moody's, we went to Moody's, Fitch, then S&P. Arrived at Moody's, 8 o'clock in the morning. They always have breakfast. Didn't have breakfast. They put us in a back room. Meeting was in a back room. It was so dim in there, I don't recall they turned the lights on. And there was no food. And it was pretty tense. So we go to Fitch. Fitch, well, they're nicer. Women will have some. They usually have something to eat and so on. Got to Fitch. They were polite, testy, no food, no water, but lights because it was had windows. At 2 in the afternoon, 2:30 in the afternoon, we got to S&P. They put us in a dirty room. Didn't bother cleaning it up. Fortunately, because the previous group left some cookies. And so we did, it was like the feeding of the 5,000 with the 5 loaves. We were portioning out pieces of cookies to get something to eat because we didn't have time for lunch. The next year we went, and we had some of the things on the to-do list checked off. So we went to Moody's, same order, same deal. Went to Moody's, they had the lights turned on and we were in a better room. No food. Water. Polite. Pointed, but polite. Went to Fitch. Snacks. Had some fruit. Went to S&P. They're a little more laid back. With S&P, we actually got some dessert. But we figured out it was in there because one of their guys obviously looked like he had too many desserts, and he had about 5 of them while we sat in there. And the next year we went, same thing. And each time we went and just laid it all out. And over the course of the year, our Treasury Department had worked with them and just laid everything out. We gave them anything they wanted. So they knew our story very well, and the to-do list was way down the to-do list. Breakfast, lunch, snacks. And so, if I tell you that it's just a great example, kind of a little humor, but of what a difference it makes when you do it the right way. Don't cut corners. Don't be cute. Help people do their job. Okay?
Time for one more question. Who has it? I've got 6, but your one will be better than my 6. I'll go with my closing question. How'd you survive all this? I mean, in 2 ways. One, when they throw a net out to catch people who did or didn't do anything wrong, usually it's not very carefully thrown. So how did you avoid any of the recriminations that came with the problems of Dynegy, and then how did you get through it personally?
The board did it. The board says, he stays. Because I had developed a reputation.
Did they become more independent-minded? Because
Oh, yeah.
earlier you
Yeah.
said that
Well, the board tossed out the management, so the board,
same board that had been bullied?
yeah, they finally had enough. And they're the ones that took it, and there were a lot of stories I could tell you of kind of events and things. But there was never a question as to whether or not I was staying. And it's because it's a blessing, and because in some ways I will admit to you that I'm somewhat culpable for what happened. Because I was happy that I didn't want to be a part of all that stuff. So I was happy when they said, midstream, you're a... Because what was happening was, over time, as we went through the kind of the late 90s and into the early 2000s, Wall Street was saying, why are you in that horrible commodity cyclical midstream business? Stay in stay in broadband, stay in gas and power and trading and all that other stuff.
All the sexy stuff.
Yeah, and so they kind of said, just just go off and run it and don't let anything happen. And they were happy to take the cash. And so I accepted that and kind of built a wall around the business. And in fact, that's what created the difficulty with Bruce when I first came. He sensed that wall. And we had a long talk one day, and I said, no, Bruce, I'm not trying to secede. I'm just conditioned to operate this way. And so we got through it, and he and I are fine now. And have been. He asked me, but he's the one who asked me to stay and run the generation business. So that's I did it by doing the right thing. Now, the real question is, the other question you had is,
How'd you cope?
well, let me get to one other thing, and that's to admit something. The thing I don't feel good about is I didn't go look when I knew I should go look. Okay? But it was I made a trade-off. And I felt a responsibility to the midstream folks who wanted to do the right thing to create the shield. And so I made a trade-off. But I don't feel good about having done that. Now, how did I cope with it? In a strong faith.
More lessons there for us. So
Mm-hmm.
this has been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lessons about business life and lessons about life in general. So we have a plaque for you. Robert J. Trulaske Sr., College of Business, University of Missouri, in appreciation to Stephen A. Furbacher. You've got the A, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We had the discussion about whether it was the dad or the son who had the A. There's the A. Bond Executive in Residence Lecture, May 1st, May Day, 2008. Steve, congratulations. Now we have a football team again. We always want people to be dressed appropriately, so let's see. Maybe we've got something for you to wear to a football game this fall.
Yeah, that'll start.
Yeah. Well, that's Trulaske College of Business. That's even better.
Oh, look at that.
There you go.
I could be on
All
that.
right.
The only thing better is the sidelines on the during the game.
Well, let's not ask for too much. Thank you all. We are adjourned.